Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting episode of Cut to the Chase. As you may already know, I am here with a very special guest. We have one lovely Kira Buckland here with us today. Kira, how are you?
I'm doing well because I had my coffee.
Yeah, I saw you tweet about that earlier today, and the thing with your neighbor as well that I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, that was funny because people took it too seriously. It wasn't like a, oh no, like, somebody's being lit on fire. It was like a, oh no, yeah, it was pretty comedic.
Oh, that was pretty good. Like I love those parts with Joseph. Like that's probably one of his staple things that he says that I love, and all the parts that especially in part four of Jojo, where you see old man Joseph and you realize he's still saying the same things that he did when he was younger, and
Exactly.
I love that part of that, and to see that actually happen, it's such a good time. But anyways, so as the show implies, I like to cut to the chase and ask the very important questions when it comes to things like this. So my first question, I guess you could say,
Wait, very important question. So is the first question gonna be like, so what's your favorite meme?
I thought about that for a second, but like, people ask you that a lot already, so I try to vary it up a little bit. But
Do they?
I just wanted to give people the rundown in case they don't really understand or know who you are exactly. So if you can give them a rundown on your pitch, I guess, about who is Kira Buckland. So in your own words, how would you describe yourself?
Okay, so I mean, if I were to describe myself, I'd probably say like I'm kind of like a really awkward nerd who's obsessed with like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and classic rock, and I'm like a described cat lady. And I mean, I'm also a voice actress, a cosplayer. Used to be a competitive gamer, now it's kind of like I'll play casually whenever I can stop being lazy, but.
So you call yourself a nerd, but you say you play a lot of games. And I know I asked you a while back. There's a question about what you would do if you weren't voice acting. You said you would run an arcade. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had this idea many years ago, and now I don't know if it would be as feasible because arcades are pretty much dying out, unfortunately,
Yeah.
but it would be kind of a coffee shop because I was like, oh, I want to run my own coffee shop and stuff like that. But it would also have arcade machines there.
Mhm.
So you go and like order your coffee, and then you could go and play fighting games against people.
Ah, okay.
It would
Well,
be kind of like a barcade, but a coffee shop instead of a
oh
bar.
man, I have not been to a single barcade yet, and we have a ton of them around here. So that's a
Oh, the
yeah.
one that I went to recently, I was not impressed at all. Unfortunately,
Really?
they didn't really have any good fighting games or anything. It was all just like, it was like arcade versions of mobile games. It was all like Angry
Oh
Birds and like
no.
all that kind of stuff. And we're like, we didn't come here for this.
Yeah, I heard a lot of stories about like a lot of arcades turning mobile games into straight up arcade machines. Like I saw one that had one for Injustice, and I thought like, oh, okay, they made an arcade machine for Injustice, but it turns out it was the mobile game for Injustice and not the actual like console based game on top of that. So I'm like, how is that? Is that a thing now that people are doing? Because I haven't
Yeah,
been in
that's
arcades in
so
ages.
weird.
Yeah. So like, what arcade games did you say you would want to have in your own like a barcade if you had one?
Oh, definitely a Guilty Gear
Yeah.
for sure.
Big Guilty Gear
Yeah.
fan.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about the new one that came out?
Oh, it's really cool. I actually just got a new fight stick recently
Oh
because
wow.
mine was like an old one and I had bought a converter for it and all this kind of stuff, but then it wasn't working, so I don't know.
I, I
I got a new one and now I'm waiting for it to be customized.
I tried to get into getting a chance to get a fight stick at some point, but I'm trying to find that one fighting game that I can really sit down and take some time to actually get good at. And I just haven't had time to do that lately because I do things like this, I stream and stuff like that. So that takes a lot of time away from me doing that period. But it is good to see that there are still people out there like yourself, for example, that are still really getting into it. And I guess that really sets you apart from a lot of voice actors that I've talked to in some ways. But another important question that I want to get to before we jump into the other stuff. Jojo, let's talk about
Yes.
it. Let's talk about it. So, okay, everyone knows or everyone refers to you as Jolene Kujo herself because of the amount of cosplay you do for her and stuff like that, and you fit the character perfectly. So, I'm kind of curious about why Kujo for you in this case.
Well, I got really into JoJo about like, I don't know, 4 years ago or something. And, all the previous JoJo protagonists have been male and stuff. And then it was like, oh, there's finally a female JoJo and stuff like that. And then I was already kind of aware of her because I used to cosplay Juri from Street Fighter.
Oh, okay.
And they're like, oh, she's based off Jolene from JoJo's and stuff. So it just seemed kind of like it made a lot of sense
Mhm.
that I would want to cosplay her.
Yeah, I mean, considering like that's like a natural progression from that into Jolene as well, since they look very similar, so I can understand where that comes from. But like, I guess I was gonna ask like what your favorite part was, but I guess that's answered by you saying that you want to cosplay as Jolene Kujo. But I'm kind of curious about like what about part 6 in general, besides her as a character that you like so much that that you would like that you would want to be part of that? Because I know you said that you would love to voice her as well, but I'm kind of
Hmm.
curious if there's anything about that part specifically besides her that you really enjoy.
I don't know. There's just a lot of cool stuff, like a lot of the fights and stuff. The fact that you see Jotaro after all that time,
Yeah.
because there's like, marine biologist Jotaro in part 4, and then it's funny because he looks younger and younger as it goes on. In like part 3,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
looks much older than in part 6. He looks more like Jolene's brother than her dad. But yeah, there's a lot of like, it's hard to even say for sure what my favorite part is
Hmm.
because I just appreciate the different parts in their own ways. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know.
No, I can totally understand that. Like I've been
I
trying.
think the series, like, it almost gets better as it goes along, I
Yes,
feel like.
yeah, it does. It definitely does.
And it gets more bizarre for sure.
Which is part of the name. I tried. I want to because I haven't really gone through all the parts myself. Like I haven't finished the parts up to part 8. I've been kind of holding off on doing that because I kind of want to see them animated first before I jump into reading them in the manga form. So like I stopped at part 4, which is Diamond is Unbreakable, and I've been kind of holding off trying to get into the other ones until those parts are animated, of course. But I do. I would absolutely love to see you as do the voice of Jolene Kujo when that part
Oh,
comes
thank
around. I
you.
think that would be a great fit for you, 100%. And
It's
you're
like all I want in life.
the goal you're aiming for, and I totally get it. So okay, now let's shift gears a little bit to the other important questions. I got plenty of them here. David Bowie.
Yes, very important.
So I'm kind of curious about how that whole thing came to be for you. Where did this obsession come from?
Okay, so this is gonna make me sound ridiculous, but actually a lot of my musical taste kind of came from JoJo. And so hear me out. I didn't really like my parents were never into rock music, so I didn't really get to listen to classic rock growing up. I listened to rock and stuff when I was a teenager, but not really so much the classics because I just it wasn't what I thought about listening to, I suppose. And then, I kind of went through a lot of like, oh, now I like this type of music or this type of music. And then when I started reading JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and stuff, and like, I don't know, I just started listening to like a lot of the bands and artists that were featured or referenced in there and stuff. And yeah.
So okay, with that said, what is your favorite Bowie song then?
Star from the Ziggy Stardust album.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I kind of saw that one coming, but I had to be sure. But no, I think that's awesome. Like, 'cause I see you when you're on Twitter, you talk about David Bowie a lot and stuff like that, and I'm like, she is so into David Bowie, and I think that's hilarious and adorable at the same time because I actually like a lot of his music too, and I can see those parallels between JoJo and David Bowie on top of that, since they make a lot of
Oh yeah,
references to
the
rock.
whole Kira
Yeah,
Yoshikage character,
yeah,
which is great because he's got my name, and then my husbando or husbrando, if you will, in part 7.
yeah. The Killer Queen thing is pretty good. It's pretty good. Like,
Hmm.
and when you told me your Skype name, I was like, this is incredible. I was blown away by that in all truth. So
Aw.
so okay. With that said, we can jump into the games that you've been in, and we'll start with Nier in this case because it is the 1 year anniversary since Nier Automata released. And
Hmm.
I've been kind of curious because I don't want to talk about how you came to voice the role of 2B. Like I'm sure that's been asked a dozen times, but I'm curious about what the journey afterward post release has been like for you since Nier came out, and the popularity that grew or the popularity behind that game that grew over time.
It was crazy. Like I never expected that, to be honest. I don't think Kyle did either because I mean, it's like we work on a lot of games and stuff, and a lot of times we'll go in and we'll work on JRPGs and we'll have a lot of fun doing them. But it's like I rarely ever get my hopes up for something getting really big or this or that, because a lot of the stuff that I do, even stuff that I'm really proud of or had a lot of fun working on, it ends up just kind of going under the radar, which I mean, it's, obviously we don't do what we do because we want it to get popular or we want
Right.
senpais to notice us or whatever. But at the same time, it's kind of like, there's always, it feels kind of disappointing when you do something where you're like, I was so proud of what I did here, but very few people like watched the show or played this game or whatever.
Yeah.
And, it's like, I kind of just assume that is like the default, that that's what something's going to be. And so, it just suddenly we'd already recorded and there was like stuff going on about like people posting about it on Twitter and stuff. And I was just like, oh man, like this is going to be big. And, I had no idea that it was going to be what it was or that. And I think part of the reason why it was so, why it really stuck with people is because the game had a lot of heavy emotional content.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And so people, they really became invested in these characters. They would cry about these characters and stuff like that. And I think that's what, it's not necessarily like my performance or anyone else's performance per se, but just the fact that like these characters and story and world that Yoko Taro created, it just like, it really affected people. So they kind of feel almost like they know us in a sense because they related so much to these characters.
Yeah. And it's funny because like I didn't think personally, because I figured like a lot of Yoko Taro games never really gain the popularity that you would expect. They tend to fly under the radar an awful lot, like you say, about some of the games that you've been in before. And when I saw like it blowing up immediately on Twitter and all my friends were playing it, everybody was talking about it, I'm like, wow, this thing really took off in a really big way. And I was actually quite proud of that because you don't really see that happen with a lot of Eastern games unless they're incredibly difficult, which Nier is not. It was more story driven, and for somebody who was also going through a bit of a dark time around the time that game came out, it definitely helped me in a lot of ways, pull myself away from that. So I definitely have an attachment to Nier in a way that I don't really have to a lot of games on top of that. Not just from the characters themselves, but from a lot of the way the story was told and the world around it. So I thought that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're going to say something?
Oh, no. Go ahead.
Okay. So I was kind of curious about, how if Nier in any way had an influence on your work going forward after that. Like I know you've done a lot of projects since then, and have you taken any of that experience with you into those projects since Nier?
Well, 2B is actually pretty different from a lot of the kinds of characters that I normally play because, she's more mature, she's more calm and level-headed most of the time, and a lot of the characters that I play are kind of like bratty and stuff. So, I mean, a lot of times the characters have just been different, but I think, I definitely learned things through playing her, like, for example, how even if you have a character who's sort of monotone as most of their baseline, it's like you can still add those nuances and stuff like that.
Which you definitely did. Like I could see, for those that haven't really played Nier, you can kind of see the changes in 2B's emotion as the story goes along, as she's figuring out or trying to suppress the emotions she has, especially towards the 9S in this case. As the story goes along, you can see a little bit of the pain that she feels, knowing what she has to do towards the end of the game, or what she's done before many times towards the end of the game. And I think that definitely came through in your performance for sure. So I was really happy about that.
Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome. So, okay, I guess this may dive into a bit of the previous question that I asked, but I was kind of curious about the impact that 2B has had on your life in general post-Nier.
Oh, well, for starters, I'm going to Ireland in a couple weeks. I've never been outside of North America before, so I'm very excited. Yeah, I'm basically going to like a Comic-Con reach out to me basically to, promote Nier and stuff. DC Douglas, who's the voice of my pod, is going to be there too.
Oh,
and
wow.
It's just like I would have never, like if you told me 2 years ago or something like, kind of like from this role in this game that you did, people are going to want you to come to Ireland. I would have been like, you're kidding. Like, no way, It's like, even like local convention, I'd be like, nah, you don't really have enough big credits, like stuff like that. So it was kind of like, I mean, I still don't know how that happened, to be honest. I feel very lucky.
Yeah, like you don't really see that happen a lot, especially in a case like this where people aren't really when you don't really see a character like 2B getting that kind of popularity, or a game like Nier getting that kind of popularity, and for it to explode worldwide on top of that from so many different countries. People talk about their experiences with the game, how much they love the characters, how much they love 2B, the cosplays and stuff like that. Like, I think it's pretty incredible to see that like you and Kyle get so many opportunities to do things like this, like travel, for example, because of the fan base behind the game that want to see you guys and talk with you guys. And I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I want to be like, clear, because I like being honest about things and, kind of being real with people listening about, a lot of people I know who listen to interviews and stuff, they want to go into this field. Yeah. And one of the things that I like to mention, even though it's not necessarily a pleasant subject to talk about, is just kind of like, that there's pros and cons to everything in life. And right. I wouldn't trade, that role or that experience for anything in the world. But one thing that I've had to deal with a lot too is a lot of negativity. Mm-hmm. And, I'm getting better now at kind of filtering that out, not seeking it out, just kind of focusing on the people who care, because the fans are just amazing. The people who watch the live streams that Kyle did. Yeah. I'm sitting in my voiceover booth right now, and I actually have a sword that one of our fans made. Like, they straight up made 2B and 9S's swords, put them in wooden boxes and mailed them out to us. So I have that sitting here in the booth, and like this 2B plush that another person sent me. Oh, wow. Like, all sorts of things. And, people have written us letters, and, someone gifted us the black boxes from the game, and just all this kind of stuff. So I try to focus on that stuff, because I do get some things that are really, really hard for me to read. And there are people who just hate me and like wish terrible things on me just because I voice their favorite character in English, or because they don't think I deserve the part, or that because I don't look as cute as this like fictional android waifu does, that I don't deserve to voice a character. Like, it's, there's a lot of like vile people who, when they can be anonymous, they like to really not really think that there's a human that they're talking to behind that screen.
Yeah. And you see a lot of that these days, especially in the case, like, and not just associated with a case of voice actors, like celebrities and things like that. You see a lot of stuff like that happen because, like you said, anonymity on the internet is a powerful thing. As long as people believe that they cannot be seen or heard or anything like that behind a screen, they feel like it's okay to let loose and say hateful things. And personally, as somebody who doesn't, is not as popular as, let's say, a popular YouTuber, for example, like there have been cases where I have gotten hate from people in several interviews for no real reason, honestly. Like, I never understood why or anything like that, but it has come my way a few times before, and I totally understand where people are coming from when they say that they get this kind of thing, and it can be hard not to pay attention to sometimes. So I totally get it when you get that kind of thing and you have to pull yourself away from it to see the more positive things from the fans, for example. So I get that.
Yeah, and I think it's human nature, because it's like, we can all say, oh, don't worry about it, they don't matter. And that, in your head, it's like, well, if the directors and the clients liked this performance that I did, but it's never fun to read that stuff. Yeah. It just, I've even seen people who are much more accomplished than me saying, oof, I should have learned, they always say, don't read the comments. And I do, I did, or whatever. Yeah. And, just the fact that with any sort of visibility, I think it's easy because a lot of us are like, especially I know people who do YouTube, people who do streaming and all that stuff, they're always saying, I want to be more visible. I want more people to like see my content, this and that, which is totally understandable. But visibility is a double-edged sword in the sense that, it also, for all the people who are saying, I love your work, they're sending gifts, they're sending emails, like all this sweet stuff, which again, I would not trade for anything, but it's like, you have a lot of vile negativity mixed in there too, unfortunately. Yeah, for every... And I do think women tend to get it a little bit worse. Like, I know men can totally deal with it too, so I'm not dismissing that, but, absolutely. I do notice because women get targeted for their looks a lot of times. Like, even though I dress up as my character, like I cosplay 2B for conventions and doing signings and stuff, and even then I get people saying, "Oh, you're too overweight to cosplay 2B," all that kind of stuff. So. Oh, geez, yeah, that is incredible. I had no idea, but yeah, I totally agree. Like, there's a lot of cases where you see that, especially in the case of women on the internet and stuff like that get into this field. You do see that a lot more often in that case, and it's great because for every several hundred people that send you great messages, there is that couple that you get that are really vile and negative, but the positives do outweigh the negatives, and that's kind of the way I look at it as well. So that keeps me, doing what I do for one. It keeps my head above water, so to speak. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned the part where you were on Kyle's streams and stuff like that, and I actually watched a few of those streams that you were on when they were playing Nier, and I believe it was during one of those that you got to, I think Kyle got to a certain part in the game, and I believe you mentioned that you weren't too pleased with one of the deliveries you did in one of the scenes, and I was kind of curious about how often that comes about for you in your voice work, where you may play a game or you may see it and actually think to yourself, well, maybe that didn't come out the way I wanted it to. Maybe I could have done that a little bit better. If I had a chance to do that, I would fix that. How often does that happen?
I mean, for me, it's pretty common. I think it's common for a lot of actors, honestly, because when you see what you see when you're in the booth is so different from what you see when everything comes together. So for example, if I were to like play an entire game or something and you're seeing all the visuals, you're hearing the music, you're hearing everybody else's lines and how things come together, it's totally different than, you know, you're in there and you have a screen with like, it's like a spreadsheet, basically like an Excel spreadsheet, at least for games. And, you know, sometimes for games, like if there's cutscenes, we do have to sync up to pictures so we get to see a little more of what's going on, but it's like, and, you know, and you have, of course, you have voice directors and you have people from the game company that do give you context and stuff. So it's not, at least in most cases, it's not like you're going in blind to, you know, but a lot of that stuff you kind of have to imagine in your head, especially because we don't get to hear the other actors. So, for example, if, let's just use Nier as an example, if I heard some of Kyle's lines, for example, if I heard what he did and, you know, react to it and all that kind of stuff, but we don't get to hear what each other does because we record separately. And it's like that for, you know, any video game, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I've talked to a lot of voice actors prior and they say things like, yeah, we, you know, I never really had a chance to sit in the booth with this other person and record the lines. Like, we usually just either, you know, get a video on the screen or some images, or we get a direction or context about what the scene is, but we don't really get a chance to sit behind the booth with each other and actually record lines all the time. And that makes more sense in cases where people think like, oh, you know, that line wasn't delivered properly, or it doesn't feel like they're actually communicating with each other, or the scene doesn't feel like there's any emotion between the characters or that they're connecting. And I can understand why that would happen, seeing as how often
and sometimes happens. Even people working on a game or something, they won't necessarily know because maybe certain things aren't finished yet, even over in Japan. Like a lot of times now, for different games, they're like, oh, we got to record the English like almost immediately after they record the Japanese. And so sometimes maybe there'll be certain conversations that can trigger based on certain events. So you don't know necessarily, okay, is this going to play in the open world when when they're like running around with a bunch of like combat going on, or is it going to play when they're like walking peacefully in like the area where you can hang out or whatever. And the deliveries for those two things will be very different. But if you don't know when it's going to play, they kind of just have to make a choice and say, okay, we're going to go with this. So
well, that definitely makes a lot more sense, because I've heard that a lot from a lot of voice actors that I've talked to, and I'm just like, I had no idea. But is like there any particular reason why that happens? Why, you know, voice actors are never in the same room with each other for recording? Or
for like an anime or something. Another thing that I was going to mention is like we get to see the scene because we have to do it to picture. But a lot of times for games, and another thing with anime is sometimes the show will be in Japanese on Crunchyroll. So if you really want, you can go and research beforehand and kind of like see what's going on. But for games, a lot of time, I mean, sometimes the game footage for something will be out in Japanese, but it's like you don't even know half the time who you're playing when you go in. You might audition for like 3 or 4 characters, and then you go in and they say, hey, you're playing this one. So, you know, as much as people are like, oh, voice actors should research what they work on, that's a lot of times not really an option. And also because of confidentiality, sometimes we're not even told, hey, this is what you're working on, or, you know, there's a lot of stuff. But to go back to, you were asking about why people don't record in the same room. A lot of it is budget reasons, to be honest, budget, scheduling. Because they do that for like big like American cartoons and stuff where, you know, they have a bunch of budget to do this type of stuff. But especially for things where we're dubbing, it wouldn't really be an efficient use of time, because you'd kind of have to have actors sitting in there like all day long. And then when someone else is doing their lines and this and that, and you're redirecting the other person, there'd be like a lot of downtime. And plus, a lot of this stuff does have to match timing of the original. They want us to hear the original Japanese for each line in most cases. And a lot of times you do have to match timing. Sometimes you don't. So it's just not really conducive, because you couldn't exactly record it like a conversation because we have to hear what the person did in the original. Even if they don't always want it to match the voice, a lot of it is like, okay, this is how intense she's going. Like, for example, certain combat lines that 2B had, like combat efforts, like, and that kind of stuff. Generally, we just kind of match what they did in the Japanese for the most part, at least in terms of volume and intensity.
Yeah.
Because you don't know when those sounds are going to play in battle. And, they kind of worked all that out in the Japanese already normally. So it's kind of like, okay, I don't want to do this light sound here where if she's like swinging this heavy weapon or whatever. Yeah. So, a lot of times we just kind of keep it along those same lines.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense because there's always that big topic of like, oh no, like you should listen to it in Japanese, you should listen to it in English, and which one is better and stuff like that. But a lot of people don't really understand the kind of work that goes into localization and translation and getting the voice actors to try to be as faithful to the source material as they possibly can, and the work that goes into that. Like it definitely makes a lot more sense to hear that from the actors themselves, to see what they do to try to bring that close to what they've seen in the Japanese version as possible.
Yeah, and I want to point out, because I know there's a lot of criticism, especially from people who don't like English versions of their media. They often say, well, it's too different from what they did in the Japanese. And I think, back in like the 90s and the early 2000s and stuff like that, there were a lot of instances where maybe people in charge felt like, okay, nobody's going to care or like this or that. So they just did whatever they wanted, if they wanted to change names, change personalities or voices somewhat. Maybe they just thought people wouldn't care. But now, like, especially for anime and stuff where people can go on Crunchyroll and watch things as soon as they come out in Japan, I think a lot of companies realize, no, it's really important to people that you do stay true to what the creator's original vision is, that you don't just, like, change it because you feel like it or, this or that. And so for many projects that I do, and sometimes you can. Like, sometimes I've worked on projects that had a ton of dialogue to record with really, really tight deadlines, and they're like, we don't have time to preview every line. We'll give you a sample so you can hear what they sound like in Japanese, but aside from that, we're going to go. But then, there'll be people there in the room who worked on, localization and stuff, and if you're getting too far off with any of the lines, they can be like, actually, she sounds like, here, we'll play the Japanese real quick so you can see what's... what it is or whatever. But plenty of times we do hear it for every line. So it's like, I know a lot of people were upset, for example, with some of the localization in Nier or like this or that. But it's like, guys, like we still listen to Japanese for every line. So
I think it's great to hear that happens, because at least that even if you're not happy with that, at least that they tried to imitate that as much as possible. It's not like they weren't. They had nothing to go on, or they didn't bother to stay close to the material that the creator wanted in the first place. I think it makes a lot more sense to see that now, considering that the amount of work you guys put into being close to that material. So I think that definitely sheds a lot of light on that for people that may not understand how that process works, for sure.
Oh yeah, plenty of things that I worked on. Say I will even have to go back and do certain lines or certain reactions even multiple times, like do a lot of takes on them, because they're like, well, we just feel it's not quite capturing what they did in the Japanese, so just try to get a little closer to that. Like that happens a lot. So I think people, they hear anything that sounds even a little different and they get upset, and it's like, okay, but is the intention true? Is the character's personality true? And also consider that there are differences across different cultures, so the way that you think Tubi is portrayed might not always be, what people in Japan, how they perceive her character. So you can say like, oh, it's different, but it's like, you don't know that unless you are actually part of that culture and speak that language as like your first language.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to a different question when it comes to like the way people view 2B as a character. Like there's the big debate about, whether or not she's too sexualized and things like that. And I think a lot of that does go back to a lot of cultural differences with the way people look at her character in the East as opposed to how we look at her in the West and things like that. And they kind of put the blame on the creator and stuff like that for calling them, they like sexualized characters about that. But I was kind of curious about what.
Oh, I loved. Did you see Yokotaro's response to that when people criticized me? Just like, I like girls. What's the problem? I mean, and also consider that she's an android, so she could be designed to be as. I mean, let's be real. If I could create a male android to assist me with things, you can bet he's going to look like David Bowie. I mean, Let's just be honest.
I'd be upset
and
if he didn't.
the important thing too, like whenever people bring this up to me, like I've had some people say that they were concerned or maybe they were turned off from playing it because they were worried that she would just be like this sex object. And I'm like, she's really not treated like that in the game. Like she wears a sexy costume. Sure, you get that, silly joke achievement or whatever, but you get one for 9S too if you play as 9S in his boy shorts, you know?
You definitely do.
And I think it's all about, it's how the character is portrayed. If the character is portrayed as like just a sex object with no personality in a game, that's a problem. But, 2B isn't portrayed that way. And she's a strong character. And there are plenty of strong women who can be sexy and authoritative. And they're like, hey, maybe I want to dress sexy. Maybe this makes me feel confident. So I don't think, and you can't really argue, oh, it's not realistic because they're androids,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there was a lot of debate around that going around about that when the game first released. And I'm just like, as somebody who, like, as a male who's seeing that, I'm just like, I don't quite understand what's going on here. So I wanted to get that perspective from the person who actually did the voice of 2B and was basically that character and has brought that character to life, at least for us in the West. I wanted to get your opinion on that at least and see how that plays out. But yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, and if you look at the way that 9S interacts with her, for instance, it's totally not that.
It's not that at all. Like 9S definitely does care for her, but he never treats her that way or sees her that way. And I think that's definitely important.
And she has a personality, so there's that.
She's got a very kind personality, and that's one of the things that I liked about her as a character in the game for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I was thinking about. I think you probably answered this question anyway, so I'm going to jump to my next one instead. So switching, gears from Nier, I want to talk a little bit about. Let's get this right the first time. Cockade.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully I got that right. I know Rio's in the chat watching this right now. He's probably shaking his head at me for sure for getting it wrong. But anyways, so I was kind of curious about like how the story went for you and your experience with the role of Mary Saotome in Cockade on Netflix. And like, how did that whole thing go down?
Oh, that was so much fun. Like for one, that I actually didn't have to audition for that part. The casting director specifically said, like, we want you for this character.
Oh, wow.
And that happened with a lot of the cast in that. And I think that's really cool. And, when I went in, I could see why, because that kind of character, and it's funny because I know a lot of people know me from 2B. So they're like, oh, you can play like crazy, like teenager characters. I'm like, that's my archetype. Like 2B was the exception. But when it comes to like where I get to like go really big and over the top and like be like a mean girl and stuff, that's my thing. Like that kind of stuff is like second nature to me.
Oh, yeah.
So, that was one of those roles, like when I feel like there's a role that I can totally like shine in or whatever. It's like, it's just so much fun.
Yeah, that was one of the cool things that I saw about that, because like I know you from a lot of the previous games you did before Nier, and even then like a lot of those characters weren't as so I guess you could say like the range of emotions that happens in the anime, where they go from kind of calm and collected to a little bit hyperactive to straight up psychotic in a lot of cases because of their gambling addiction in that series. And it was fun to see that, and it was almost like it gave you a chance to finally let loose in some sense. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And I actually, how I approach this, or how I think of it, is different from how most actors do, I feel like, because to me it's easier to play a character that's just crazy than to do something like the hardest thing for me as a voice actor is when they say, we just want this to sound like a real person, like talk like you're talking to your best friend or whatever. You see that in a lot of like commercial copy or whatever. And to me that's so hard, because I'm like, I don't know how to do this without like sounding bored and like. But then if I try to do it like how I think it should be done, they're like, oh, it sounds too polished or like this or that. But, it's weird. Like, so when I get to have a lot of emotion and stuff like that, it's like the best.
Oh, yeah, because it definitely shows the anime. Like, I know Erica as well, who does the voice of Yumiko. Like, I had never seen her have those range of emotions before, and I thought that was really cool. Probably one of the reasons why I like the anime so much is the range of emotions and how fast they can change at the drop of a hat in certain scenes. And it was fun seeing that for both of you guys, at least, because I'm fans of both of you.
Aw.
I thought that it was fun to see your interactions together when you guys had that moment of being calm and collected, or when the first episode hits and Mary's going against Yumiko, and you guys are having your moments where she's really confident and excited about winning, and then it turns around on her and she's really down and out. And I thought like that kind of emotion, that kind of change of emotions is really prevalent in a voice actor's talent. It really shows that talent behind the voice actors. And I think you definitely nailed that for Mary for sure throughout that season for sure. So I was really happy with that.
Thanks. I mean, I feel like the casting was just on point for that show. Like everyone that I heard fit their roles so well.
It was like an all-star cast. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, and the fact that it wasn't even like a big, because you have some things that have big drawn out audition processes, and even then it's like the cast doesn't sound, and here they're just kind of like, okay, we know this person would be great for this character and so on and so forth, and it just fit perfectly.
It definitely did. I was really happy with that, because I had already seen it in Japanese, but when I heard that you guys were doing the dubbing for English, I had to watch it again, and I was not disappointed in any way whatsoever. That was fantastic for all of you.
I love the faces too. It reminds me of Jojo when they do those weird faces.
That's the thing that I love about it. Is like the one thing that I was hoping they would get right when they animated it was the faces, and they nailed that too. And the way you guys portrayed that in your voices just fit perfectly throughout that season. So I was really happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess because we're running a little bit short on time here, and I want to try to get to a couple of viewer questions before this is over. So I'll probably skip over the last 2 questions that I have and get to the viewer questions that I was able to pick up. So this question comes from YouTube, and it comes from Ryosuke Kagawa. That's Ryo in the chat who's watching right now.
Oh, hello.
He says, "Who is?" You already answered this earlier, but for his case, who is your favorite JoJo character, and why is it Dio-sama?
Well, it is sort of a version of Dio-sama. I mean, I mentioned before, but my husbando, Diego, because, I mean, think about it. It's like he's hot. He's got a little dino tail. He loves coffee, which is a huge, I couldn't be with somebody who didn't like coffee. I mean, it's like, why? What's wrong with you? And, a David Bowie stand. Like, how much better could you get?
Yeah, that is true. So you're a big fan of the Killer Queen stand, is that correct?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I guess what I was going to ask off of that was for part 4, like Akira Yoshikage, like did you think that they portrayed him in a proper way? Like seeing that translated from the manga to the anime, do you think they actually, that they stayed true to the source material on top of that, but also offered him a voice that actually stayed true to his character, that fit his character for that part 4, I guess you could say?
Yeah, overall, I say the anime is very true to the manga. I know a lot of the really elitist JoJo fans and some of the groups that I'm in on Facebook and stuff are very much like, the anime and this and that. But it's like, but the anime does a really good job at staying faithful to the manga, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm pretty happy with all the voices. Like the only thing that was a little jarring is I used to play like the JoJo games, and they changed the voices of all the characters, like, some of the part 3 characters and later. So like the parts that hadn't been animated yet, when those games came out, they would have a different voice for some of the characters. And that was like a little bit jarring because I'd be used to the character sounding a certain way, like, and not that, anybody wasn't good, but it was just like Koichi, for example, was played by a woman in the games, if I recall correctly. So I was like used to that voice. And then he's voiced by a guy in the anime, and they both do a really good job at the character, but it's just you're used to one thing and you're like, oh, what?
Yeah, I forgot about, because those are the fighting games that came out, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely forgot about those because it had been so long, and a lot of that I tried to stay away from because it was kind of spoiler territory for the parts that had not been animated yet that I was trying to stay away from. So I had no idea that they had done a lot of that before, like a lot of those parts had even been animated on top of that. So that's pretty cool to hear from one JoJo fan to another, of course.
Yeah, like I think when I first played All-Star Battle, I hadn't read all the parts. So it's like, it's funny when you hadn't, but a lot of the stuff you don't know. For example, you're arigato, Jairo, and you're like, oh, okay. And then it's like someone who's read the manga hearing arigato, Jairo, and you're like,
Oh my. So wait. So I want to take it back to part 4 just a minute, or part 3 actually. Did you say that you had like a small role in one of those parts, or I think it was part 3?
Oh, yeah, I was a Jotaro fangirl.
Oh wow.
I'm pretty sure I got that just because I'm obsessed with Jojo. Like, let's be real.
They knew. That is awesome. I had no idea. I think that puts you one step closer to being Jolene Kujo.
That's why I'm like, okay, can I just play his daughter one day, please? That's like all I want. I actually play her, and like the project's kind of dead right now, unfortunately, but there are some parts from when it was a thing on YouTube. Someone was doing a manga read through, and it was actually done really well, and I played Jolene for that.
I did see that.
Why did it have to be that Tom Cruise?
I did see that actually, and I thought that was a perfect fit for you too. So I'm like, there should be no reason why you wouldn't get that role at this point.
Well, I want to say that, but at the same time, it's like it doesn't really matter how much you like something. It's one thing to be like, okay, like, here's like a side part or whatever, but as much as I'm like, they're not like gonna give it to me just because I really want it. Sadly, they're gonna be like, well, it's got to go to whoever's best. But I'm just like, oh. My friends joke and they're like, well, I'm pretty sure that if anyone who knows you gets an audition for that part when the time comes, they're going to be like, just let Kira have it. Let her have it. She wants this more than I do.
Like, she's been wanting this forever now. Just let her have it. It's okay. It's okay. I'll back out of this for this just this once. I'll back out. So yeah.
Like, you can have any other role. Just let me have this one.
And I think a lot of people wouldn't disagree with that, in all honesty. But I think I'm going to have to wrap it up there for the questions because I don't want to take up too much of your time as it is. And I think we're at that hour point. So, so Kira, thank you so much for your time and coming on the show. I really do appreciate you giving me the opportunity to actually sit down and chat with you about Nier and things like that. I wanted to ask a few more questions, but I probably have to say that for another time if you don't mind, coming back on the show at some point in the future to talk about more of your, the work that you've done in some of the past games like Tales of Hysteria, for example, that I wanted to ask about. And some of your future roles like Beatrice and the upcoming ReZero English dub on top of that. So that'd be fun to do if you were, interested in coming back on the show at some point in the future. Yeah, and hey, it's like I've got some really cool stuff coming out this month and next month, so... Oh, I'm looking forward to that then. That'll be a lot of fun. So yeah, thank you so much again, Kira. I really do appreciate that. I know that I tried to avoid a lot of the same questions that people have asked. I probably dipped into a lot of the same ones that they've asked before. But there was a lot of things. You had great questions, and you asked me about Jojo and music, so I always appreciate that. I had to. I felt like it'd be a missed opportunity if I didn't do that. So thank you so much for that, Kira. And I guess I'll bring you back on again in the future to talk about that. And I'll have this up on YouTube for you to check out as well whenever you get the chance to. And I'll be sure to post it to you when that happens as well. But thank you so much for that, Kira. And I will talk to you again very soon. Oh, thank you so much for having me. Anytime.